Should you buy a property or rent out a property? Which one is better? My answer actually is it depends. It depends. There's a couple of factors that determine if you should buy a property or if you should rent a property. The number one factor obviously is affordability. So can you afford to buy the property? Can you afford to buy a property in the place that you want to buy in? And in most cases, you'll find that a lot of people that are buyers or people that are buying property don't know how to buy property below market value. So you'll find that people buy a property, but they have to pay extra on the mortgage that they've already taken. So the mortgage, say it's 700, they bought a property for 700,000. They're renting out the very same property for 6,000 rand, and their interest rate is high, and they're paying the bank, say, 8,000 rand. So they're getting rent for 6,000, they have to pay an additional 2,000 rand, and on top of that, they still have to pay rates. So in most cases, a lot of people that are buying property don't know how to get property below market value, and they were hoping that 5 years down the line or 10 years down the line, the rent of the property would have increased so that what they're paying the bank and what they basically getting from their tenant is more or less equal. But for most people that are buying property, they are buying property on market value, and the rent is usually lower than what they're basically paying for the bank. So if you don't afford to basically take out that extra money, so if you want to stay in an area where the properties are 700,000 and you don't afford to pay 700,000 if you get 10% bond, and you don't afford to pay 7,000 per month for that property, rather rent it out for someone else that's willing to give you the very same property for rent for a lower price if you do not afford to buy that very same property. So that's number one reason why I feel it's either you can choose which one is better for you between buying and renting. Can you afford? And number two reason that you should consider is your workplace and your ability to move around. So in most cases, or some cases, a lot of people are moving. They don't stay in an area for a long time, maybe because of work, maybe because of school, maybe because they're not stable yet. So if you're not stable, or if you have not found a place that you'll say, this is my permanent resident, and I want to be in this place for the next 10 years or 20 years, then obviously it makes more sense to rent in that area instead of buying in that area. For example, when I used to work in construction, we would move around. And in construction, a lot of people that are in construction, they move around. Fortunately, I didn't move around far, but a lot of people that are in construction, they'll move from Joburg, the next year they're in Cape Town, the next year they're in Durban. So you don't want to buy a property in Cape Town and then a year later you sell it, and then you go to another place and then sell it, and then go to another place and sell it. So you would want to rent out a rent as you go, but maybe have a permanent place or a permanent home that you want to stay in, but where you'll be staying, you'll basically be renting out those properties. So that's number two reason what you should consider if you should buy a property or you should rent out a property. How stable are you, and how are you moving in terms of are you stable in terms of your work, in terms of your schooling, in terms of whatever situation that's happening in your life? How stable are you? And the other reason that you should consider if you should buy a property or rent out a property is the fact that if you have the money and you can afford buying a property, know that the property value is appreciating and the money is depreciating. So the money that you're having now, think about it this way. 10 years ago, you used to buy bread for 2 rand 50. But the very same bread that was 2 rand 50 10 years ago, now it's 15 rand now. And 10 years from now, the very same bread will probably be 30 rand, 40 rand. I don't know how much it will be, because the money keeps on depreciating while the assets the things that you are buying keep on going up. So the bread was 250 10 years ago, but now it's 15 rand. And 5 years later, 10 years later, the very same bread might be equals to more amount of money. So it's the same with property. Properties that were bought 10 years ago, and now the amount of money that you have to put in for a property that was sold 10 years ago and now, the money is absolutely different. So you want to consider that you can afford the property, you are stable in your job, or you are stable as an entrepreneur, you're getting enough money. So therefore, you can basically buy the property. And if not, then obviously go for the rent option. But consider the fact that the property value keeps on increasing while the money that you are buying with keeps on decreasing, right? And the other reason, or the number 4 reason why what you should consider is because it's absolutely better to keep on paying for your own mortgage instead of someone else's mortgage. That money that you're putting in to rent out a property, if it's a stable place and you can afford to buy that property, you're basically putting money into a property that will be yours, and the mortgage is yours, and it will be paid off eventually. And when you put extra money into that mortgage or into that loan that you have, that extra money reduces your interest rate, reduces your interest, and reduces the amount of years that you have to pay for that very same bond that you are basically paying for. So you are paying, or you're putting money into your own bond. So that's number 4. That's something that you should consider if you should rent out a property, or if you should buy the property. And reason number 5 that you should consider is this: if you are renting out a property and you're gonna stay in that property for the next 10 years, consider this: what are some of the things that you're gonna be fixing in that property? If there is a chance that you will be fixing things in that property, are you fixing your own things, or are you fixing someone else's things? Because the things that you're going to be fixing in that property are not going to be yours, and they don't belong to you. So if you don't like maybe lighting for that property, you don't like the ceiling, some tenants will fix certain things. Obviously, according to that relationship will depend according to your landlord, if the landlord actually approves of you to basically fix. But if you do fix something, you fix the garden, you fix the painting, or you fix this, or you fix whatever you fix in that property, it will not be yours at the end of the day. But if it's your own property, at least if you're fixing anything, the value of that property keeps on going up, and it's your own property at the end of the day. So if you're going to be renting a property and you do any renovations, you're renovating for the landlord. But if you're renovating the property, you're renovating for yourself if you own that property. So that's something that you should consider if you should buy the property or rent out the property. And reason number 6, and perhaps my final reason why I think you should consider if you should buy a property or rent a property is this: if you buy a property, you have the option of renting out certain portions of the very same property. So you can build rooms and then basically rent out those rooms. You can portion, if you are willing to basically share your property, you can basically portion your property and say this portion will be by a tenant and this portion will be I will stay in. And I've seen that happen a lot with a lot of people, especially people that are new in working, where they know they do not afford and they don't need the whole space in the property, so they rent out a certain portion to their friends or their family members, and then those friends or family members keep on paying them, and that extra additional amount of money goes to the bond repayment. So that's something that you should consider. Can you rent out a portion of your property if you want to? And sometimes I've seen also, if the lease agreement that you have with your landlord agrees, some people rent out a property and rent it out to someone else. So you rent out a property and it's 5,000 rand, and you a certain portion you rent out to someone else for a certain amount of money, but you still stay in that very same property. And I have people that I've seen doing that very same thing, where they basically rent out a certain property, say it's 10,000 rand each and every single month, but their friend pays 5,000 rand and they pay 5,000 rand. And if you have the whole property, can you, or is it possible for you to rent out the very same property that you're renting out for 5,000 rand, rent it out to someone else for 7,000 rand? So is there a possibility for you to do that with your property or with someone else's property? Because that happens a lot of times. So those are some of the reasons that you can basically consider if you want to buy a property or if you want to rent out a property. Can you do either of the two? And I'm not saying which one is better. Obviously, it's situation dependent. Sometimes it's better to rent and sometimes it's better to buy. But consider these reasons before you make your final decision. I hope you love this video. If you love it, click on the like button. Comment below. What are some of the things that you agree with and some of the things that you absolutely do not agree with? And what are some of the things that you also like me to share about entrepreneurship, about property as a whole, and also just entrepreneurship, not just property, because I'm trying to make this not just property related, but entrepreneurship as a whole. If you have other guests that you'd like for me to basically have in my show, comment below. What are some of the topics that you'd like for us to cover? I'll bring experts in that particular field and we can share some of this knowledge. But otherwise, I'll see you on the next video. Thanks for listening. Cheers.